Oh, tell me you didn't fall for the clickbait title. Please don't. Please don't tell me you fell for it. Oh, you did. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but this is not going to teach you to be some colorist master. It's not a master class. It's nothing like that. I just thought it might be a good idea because I've been ignoring this side of things for so long. Not in my personal side of things, not in my personal work or my professional work, but just in the podcast and sharing tips and techniques with people. This is really one where you have to watch it. You have to see it. It's not very easy to do on the podcast. So I thought I would just take a minute here because I have this work in front of me that is actually a spec ad, which means I can show you some of the images straight out of the camera, which is great because we'll compare, contrast straight out of the camera versus a little tiny bit of polish. And that little tiny bit is the key part, right? This is not a system. I'm not going to show you every single aspect of the system and how I approach it. I'm just going to show you what I do to probably 75% of the stills that I'm putting out or of the images that I'm passing on to directors, to colorists. If I'm on a job where there's a colorist, I will pass them these stills after the shoot and say, this is what I would try to do. And it serves really two purposes. Number one, I want to be able to objectively measure after every single job whether or not my approach worked. And the only way to do that is to have some understanding of how color works and how the finishing process works because it plays such a big role in the visuals. Right? You can do your job as a cinematographer, but it gets passed through to the colorist and they botch it now in this world that we're living in and the tools that are available now. They can have such a big impact that you don't know if it's you that screwed up or them that has terrible taste. It could be either or. You don't know. Well, this way, when you look at the footage, you apply basically the same thing to everything. Well, then you start to see and you start to develop patterns and you start to see where you're improving, where you need a little bit of work. And that's why this system was originally developed, right? There should be some sort of disclaimer on this video and that I am not a colorist. You should not copy the way that I'm doing this unless you like the images. If you like the way the images look at the end or my stuff, this is how I'm doing 75% of it. So we're not going to get into the whole system of all 12 nodes and exactly why they're like that. That would be an 8-hour long video. And maybe someday we'll go into that level of depth. But for here, we're going to talk about what is probably the most basic way that you can approach images. And we're going to see side by side, straight out of the camera with the camera LUT and with just that tiny bit of polish to see the difference it can make so that you can judge for yourself whether or not you're getting better, okay? So let's jump into it. Okay, so like I said, this is a spec ad, which is finally why I actually get to show you some of the straight out of the camera images. We shot this, not that it really makes a difference. This system works with any camera. It works with any footage. This is shot on the Alexa Mini LF. And we use Cookspeed Pencros, and that's pretty much all you need to know. We shot open gate, which gives you this weird aspect ratio when you come in because it's taller than it is wider here than it is for the 16:9 frame. So that's why you get these black bars. But the very first thing that I will do on all of these projects, anytime I'm doing anything like this, is I will set up the same structure on every single frame, on every single sequence, every single shot, I should say. So you'll notice that there's 12 nodes. Like I said, we're not going to go into every single thing because it would take too long, but I'm going to show you the basics of how to get something that I'm happy with in the least amount of time, right? So let's come in here. We will pick a shot. Which shot should we do? Something fairly easy. We got some close-ups. Here we go, this one. Let's go to this. Okay, so we've got this picture. This is the 75mm of a girl. She's sitting on a trampoline. And basically, I want to see, did I screw this up or not? Like, how good can we make this thing look? So you'll notice it's in log. Normally, I would not put the LUT here, but for our scenario today, I'm going to put the LUT in number 10. Let's come down here, go to 3D LUT, ARRI, and in all my projects, I use a derivative of the ARRI Rec 709 standard LUT, which I just call the squeeze and drop. And that squeeze and drop LUT is specifically named that because of this technique. And I've talked a little bit about this technique before, but I've never shown it in this amount of detail, which it's not some complex revolutionary thing. It's just an idea of what to do with the values inside of the image to get something that I'm happy with most of the time. We're not going to talk about the lighting or anything like that, but what I will tell you is this image follows pretty much every single aspect of the framework that we always talk about on the podcast. So we're already starting, like just if you look at it straight out of the camera, this is what it looked like on the day. It looks pretty nice, right? Like I'm happy with the way that this is done. Let's see though what we can do, the little tiny minute changes where we can add 1 or 2% here to make the thing 10% better or just that little bit poppier. So I'll leave shot number one, or node number 1. I'll leave that blank. And that's, again, for a very specific reason. And I'll come into 2. And in 2, I'm just going to make my overall adjustments to contrast, right? Let's see how much we can make this thing really pop. And the way to do that is I know myself. I don't trust my eyes at all. This is coming from someone who relies on their eyes for their profession. I don't trust them. I know I've made enough mistakes in the past to know not to trust them. So I come down here to saturation all the way down to 0. Give me black and white, right? This is the Roma vibe that we were talking about. And now I'm just looking at this thing. Actually, I should probably make it bigger. So let's come fill the frame. This is one of the great parts of shooting open gate is it allows you to reframe, right? If you're a little bit off in your operating skills, just allows you to reframe a little bit. And so I don't know what I was doing operationally wise here, but she's not in the center. So we'll just go in a little bit more, something like that. And then maybe a little bit down more. Okay, so that's our reposition of the shot. And we've desaturated the whole thing. And we're not going to keep it desaturated. We just want to judge the contrast. And when you take all of the color out, it just makes it a little bit simpler for me to really focus on where am I looking? Where is the light drawing me? And in this situation, I'm probably going to want to focus just up here, right? Because this is where she's got a little bit of heat in that top of her skin. You can see it just starting to go, and I'm looking at the scopes. It's nowhere near clipping, right? It's down at 80 IRE, which is really, really far away from clipping, but it's just something that I'm going to immediately be drawn to. Like I'm looking there, I see it's hot. I'm going to try and tame that while giving some shape to the face. So, and I'm just going to do this globally. This is not, we're not talking about just her face. I'm talking about the whole image. What can we do to it to make it pop? So just come down here to gain. I'm just going to crank up the gain, bring down the gamma a little bit, which a lot of people don't like touching the gamma, but we'll bring down the gamma. Let's see, just like that. And then I'm just going back and forth, and that doesn't really work because I had the saturation. But you can see, oh, you can't really see, can you? Let's go back to saturation 50 and close enough. So you just see, I'm just bringing the whole thing down really, but her skin doesn't really, it just adds a little bit of central pop. I might just bring that up just a little bit more, something like that, right? So now go a little bit flatter, a little bit more density to it, right? A little bit more zing to it. That's that. Number 3, and again, I'm trying to get through as many of these images that I can then pass on to the director or the colorist. I'm not going for a final locked in look. It's just really getting the basics. I would say after 2, which is our level adjustment, 3 is just the overall color temperature, right? Not dialing specific areas, but just the overall temperature of the thing. Is it neutral? So I would say here, could probably go a little bit cooler. Take it there, and then just a little bit of red, right? Just eking it in. And what does that give us? That's probably a little bit much. Something like that. Again, just going back and forth. I'm looking here at my Flanders monitor as opposed to the computer monitor, and you can just see it really in the skin on this left-hand side and back here. You can see it just get a little bit more neutral as opposed to being as green as it was. So I'm liking that. Okay, so if I do, let's see, oh, you take them all off like that. That's okay. That's a good start right there. Level, so contrast and level, then balance. Then I come in here, and this is where you can see this is node 5 is always different from the others because it has attached to it an outside node. And again, this is really just for speed. There's a lot of different ways to manipulate skin, a lot of different ways to focus people's attention inside of Resolve or Scratch or whatever it is you're using. This one is just the broadest. And I've always found that, you look at some of the content that is out there for education on being a colorist or just coloring your own stuff. It's so complicated, which hard enough doing it on one single shot, but trying to match stuff, that's what really separates the professionals from the people that are just winging grades on things. The more complicated you make it, the more specific you make it, the easier it is to mess it up. And you want to keep these changes as global as possible, as broad as possible. So one thing that I did here is I didn't want to put the panels down. Normally I have panels that I'll use because it makes you incredibly faster, just so much quicker because you never have to take your eyes off the screen and everything becomes very tactile. You can touch everything and all the knobs are a lot easier to adjust when you're staring at the actual image. Here I have to look down, find the thing down here, then look back up at the image, then look at the monitor. It just becomes a little bit clunkier, which might be easier to follow now, but it's significantly harder to work that way. So I use a specific system when I don't have the panels, which is opacity. I'm a crazy person for opacity because I know exactly where it is on the screen. Therefore, when I make a big change, I'll always go super heavy-handed and then back off the opacity because I can stare right at the screen. Now I lean much more on that when I just have a setup like this, just keyboard and a tablet. If I have the panels, I don't have to do that near as much. I can be much more exact in the actual tools themselves. So just know if you're on keyboard and mouse or whatever it is, and not panels, it's much easier, I think, I find, to do it through opacity of the node. Okay, so in 5, I'm just gonna come here, create a circular power window, and 75% of the time you have faces inside of shots, whether this is a single, I mean, this shot is a little bit unique because her face takes up so much of the image, but I'm just gonna come here, make a little outline of her face, and remember I said as broad as you possibly can. Doesn't really matter the fit of the mask, it's just softening it off. And I'm gonna come down here, I'm just gonna bring it up a little bit of crunch, Oop, probably too much crunch there. A little bit up. And in here, I'm gonna come back here and take off the highs just a little bit because you can see this heating up over here. Right, you see that little hot area heating up over there? Just gonna take it down just a little bit there. Come back here, go like this. What does that give us? Just that little bit of, you know exactly where to look, right? That little tiny bit of elevation in the gain and just a little bit of crunch in the gamma and lift, tell you where to look. And then depending on the camera you're using, you can come in here and sharpen with this kind of stuff. I mean, the Cook Speed Pancros are really soft, but doesn't need much, right? Just a little 49 on the blur, maybe just a hint of mid-tone detail. Okay, that gets us there, right? But now comes the squeezing and the dropping part. So we've already squeezed and dropped in the actual captured footage or in the lighting through the LUT, right? That 3D LUT that we use, the squeeze and drop, it's basically doing, before we get to any of this, it's doing that on the camera side of things. Then when we come into Resolve, this is the node 6 is really the node that does the squeezing and the dropping. So what we're gonna do is lower the contrast outside. So it's not affecting anything on our face. You can see exactly where it's affecting if you overcook it. But let's just lower the contrast to something like that. Now you can see the difference. See back here in those denser areas, we're starting to expand the tones inside of the shadows. Then we're gonna use the offset and pull all of our expansion down. Just shift it down the histogram or shift it down on the waveform monitor, right? Expand and then shift down. And that's what gives you that real big, thick toe feel, which I think is the mark of quality. So we do that, we just bring this down now, let's see. Oh, we got it turned off, genius. Okay, so overcook it, right? You can start to really see that window come into effect. Let's overcook it to something like that, right? It feels a little bit comic booky. And we come over here to opacity, and now we just take it back to where it feels a little bit more neutral. Like that, maybe a little bit less. There you go. See, it's not much, right? But that little tiny bit of darkness, I mean, I'd say that's 2% better. And then like, as in focusing your eye, 2% better than not having it. And now if we take all this stuff off, let's just take all this off. So you can see just the LUT. There it is, a little bit flat from the squeeze and drop, a little bit flat from the lighting. There, it just adds that punch where it immediately sucks you in. Now, as you get a little bit crunchier, it starts to get slightly more saturated, more color, and you can just come into 4 and just take that down. Come in there like that. What does that give us? Just that little bit of edge just off the oranges. You can see it in her skin the most. Yeah, so that's it. I would say, okay, from here we print, right? Like if she's moving around, you'd have to track the window in. But if you're just exporting stills to a director, this tells the colorist and the director much more about the direction that you were actually trying to get. It also tells me about all the lighting. Like, were my ratios actually right? I mean, I saw what came out of the camera, which is, let's see, which is this, right? This came out of the camera, which is pretty good, but that doesn't tell me the whole story. Now that's something, okay, I like that. I like the look of that. And it's easy enough to get there. And if it's easy enough for me to get there, then the colorists will be able to get there, right? Because they're gonna be significantly better. They're gonna have more systems. And if you wanna talk about do an entire project and matching, that is where these other nodes come in. But this is about setting a base look, okay? So now that we've seen it work on one, should we do one more just to see the whole thing in action again? Let's see. We do one. Where's one that we can do? Okay, this one will do. Let's take this one. And again, I'm gonna put the LUT in 10. And again, I would not do this. Normally I would put it in the whole, over the whole project, so I wouldn't have to waste 10 on the node. First things first, looking at this, we do the zoom to find our frame and a little bit up like that. Okay, let's say we're happy with this frame size. Number one, it's about a stop overexposed. Don't even need to look at the black and white to see that. But I'm gonna come up to 2, lower the saturation all the way down. Immediately, what I'm gonna do to fix that overexposure, let's come in something like that. Feels a lot denser, right? This feels like, this is probably like the look that you would have on set to please someone that said it was too dark. Be like, yeah, look how bright it is. See, everything is good. When in your mind, you actually had something significantly. Well, let's see if we can take the saturation back to 50. Let's see, it's close enough. This is more the vibe that you were going for, right? Easy enough to do, especially depending on the camera that you have. The Mini LF has so much dynamic range, and you can play with the colors so much because of the codec. You can do stuff like this to beat multiple stops over and just pull it down with one thing. Okay, so let's go back to, besides just the offset, we'll make some other corrections here with the saturation. Let's just pull this up a little bit, pull down the gamma just a little bit. Again, really looking at the face and how it compares to the background, and then judging these. So you got your key side, your fill side, and your background. Just seeing how those ratios mix. I've got a nice strong key. Doesn't really make it over to the other eye, and then the background, which is further down. I'd say that's pretty good there. Let's go back to 50. And we'll move on to the actual tint. 50, close enough. Okay, tint here, got a really red face, and that's coming from there's all these bricks that are inside this actual building. Red bricks are the worst to shoot in. So I'm gonna say, let's go a little bit greener, not too much. Let's go a little bit less warm, something like that. All right, maybe a little bit too blue. Something in there, and something like that. Now let's see, red to a little bit more neutral, right? You can tell, especially in the gray sweatshirt there. Okay, we come down to, remember our special node here. We're gonna do the exact same system. Open up your power window the face. Can probably get it just inside the face and then soften it off as you need. Come to here, just lift. A little bit more, a little density in the gamma, a little density in the lift. Bump off of it so we can see what we're doing. And again, it's just that little tiny, see there's not much in it. But it's just that little punch, which just is like, yep, here we are, look here. Then we take our outside node, we squeeze the values closer together. You can see, can you see it? Why doesn't this histogram change? Oh, this curves isn't changing like the scopes. But, I mean, you can see it with your eye. Let's just take a little bit off, and then we'll just drop that background down. It's probably too much off the contrast, like that. Just that little tiny bit, and you start to see it feels a little bit comic-y, a little comic booky in the ratios between here and the background and here and the rest of him. If you find that is the case, just make this thing slightly bigger. You don't want comic booky. Just draw it all over him as opposed to just his face. Then we come here, checking. That's better. You don't want it bleeding into off of them, whatever it is. And that's pretty much just localized just on him. The way that that also helps, the way that you can keep that contained is if you have your values on the lighting setup, right? So this comes back to learning what we're doing on set to see if it's working for us and how we can give the colorist the most to work with. And the easiest to work with is if we were to set this ratio of light right behind his head and now we were affecting something in this window, they'd start to bleed together and it would look like shit. So we don't want to do that. So again, separating things on layers, even in the lighting, makes it better as a finished product. Okay, so I'm happy with that level. How's that? That's pretty good. Probably what I would do here is I would come down to 11. So this is post LUT. And I would just do something like this. Let's see, a little bit bigger. Outside. Again, contrast. Again, lower. And then we'll get off of that. And again, it's just a little bit now. It's just a tiny vignette all the way around, but it just focuses the eye. Come back in here. You know, here in this situation, I'd probably go into a little bit more detail because he's got a weird looking face color. And you could do that through, you know, an HSL qualification, but all those things get really tricky and you start to have to look at every single frame and things could break up depending on the key that you're pulling. I would probably just do, well, let's just see. I'd probably do just a hue versus saturation, come up and ping it like that, take it down, something like that. You know, just a tiny bit of desaturation. And if you look at the on off, just that little tiny bit will do. Then we've got the little tiny little vignette that is all around it. And here, something I would do, I maybe just edge off all the saturation again, just because it feels a little bit crunchy. Something like that. And then now you can start to see, as you decrease the saturation, you can get a little bit crazier with the casts. So now we can get a little bit crazier. Instead of going this blue color, we can go a little bit warmer. But really, that's it. 1, 2, the saturation node. Our inside-outside, which is the squeeze and drop element of it, which is probably the most important for just drawing people's eyes. And then, last but not least, we just did that little tiny vignette. But you can see it's really basic, broad principles, where if you're doing tons and tons of these, you got to get through 20 of these. After you're just done shooting, you got to pass this thing on to the director and to the colorist. You don't want to be spending 15 hours doing all this stuff. So the whole structure of the 12 nodes has a big system to it, but I would advise you not to copy this. I would say, see if this works for you. See if the images that you get you like. And if you do, then you know what you're doing correct. You're probably shooting it correctly, and you're doing the color. At least you know what you want and what you can ask the colorist for, or to go in that general direction, or what you're trying to get through. And that's probably 90% of the battle, is just being able to communicate with the colorist to say, hey, this is what we're going for. This is what I'd like to see. And if you don't know this stuff, then people say, you know, oh, it just randomly came out of the camera and it looked like this. Like I didn't have anything to work with. You say, what? Like, wait a sec. No, it definitely wasn't like that. If it all started like this, you know it doesn't have to end up like that, right? Go back to this. You know, feels significantly different if you let it run through. And this works for everything. I mean, it works for anything with people in it. You can do this exact same setup, which is probably 95% of the stuff, right? It's all going to be in that world. Okay. That's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you got a little something out of it. Like I said, come up with your own system, try it out, make sure it works. If it doesn't, do something else. I'm thinking this might actually be a fun series of things where I'm going to take other people's color grading tutorials or videos on YouTube. I'm going to try and follow along with them and see whether or not their system works, because I've been so ingrained in this 12 node system for so long. And it has just come to define all of the work that I do and the looks that I get. So it might be fun to try and expand that out and see just how hard it is to do to replicate some of these looks that people are coming up with just randomly. Okay, that's going to do it. We'll see you in the next one, probably in 6 months.